Welcome to Supersmart Traveler, where we share our love of travel and history to help you be a super smart traveler. Today we are traveling to the City of Light, Paris, France. Paris has so much to offer nearly every traveler, from the cultural and historical sites and museums to the shopping, food, and sporting events and theme parks. There is never a lack of things to see and do in Paris. You can easily spend a week in Paris and not see all there is to see, but equally, even if you only have a day, it is worth your time to spend that full day and soak in as much of Paris as you can. As a caveat, we cannot possibly cover the entire history of Paris in depth. We will be skipping a lot of events and trying to focus on the history and events that relate to the sites you may see while traveling. In approximately 259 BC, a Celtic Gaul tribe settled in the area that is now known as the Île de Lutece because of its importance as a trade route across the Seine River. In 52 BC, after years of conflicts between these Gauls and the Romans, a general of Julius Caesar conquered the village, and Rome created the town of Lutetia. Speaking of Gauls and Romans, you may have heard of the French comic Asterix and Obelix. These comics are iconic in France and have influenced French culture in numerous ways, from the many movies to the naming of the first French satellite to the theme park, Park Asterix. Park Asterix is 35 kilometers north of Paris and is renowned in France for its variety and number of rides. For those interested in theme park attractions while visiting Paris, Supersmart Traveler would recommend considering Park Asterix as an alternative to that other major theme park to get a more French-inspired experience. Following the Roman conquest and creation of Lutetia, or Roman Paris, Lutetia was an important city, defending the empire against the Germanic invaders and even periodically being the Roman capital of Gaul. If you want to see remnants of Roman Lutetia today, Supersmart Traveler would recommend two sites. First, the medieval Cluny Museum gives important insight into the medieval city and is even free if you happen to be there on the first Sunday of the month. Located within the museum are the remains of the thermal baths and the vast vaulted room, the Frigidarium. The second site is the Arene de Lutece, or Lutetia Arena, which was a Roman amphitheater. Supersmart Traveler highly recommends visiting the Arene de Lutece, as it will not take up too much of your time, and it is truly fascinating how a Roman amphitheater is hiding in an otherwise normal Parisian neighborhood, and is now used for picnics and football. Over the next centuries of the Middle Ages, Paris would see the gradual decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the Franks coming in, and essentially the first king of what would be France. There were periods of prosperity and growth thanks to trade and political influence, but also neglect when the capital was moved to other cities, or even destruction from conflicts like Norman invasions. In 987, Hugh Capet founded a new dynasty of kings, the Capetians, and under his rule, Paris was rebuilt from these Norman invasions. Paris began to grow and prosper, and in the 12th and 13th centuries, we see some of the most famous sites in Paris start to come about. First, construction began on the Cathedral of Notre Dame in 1163 and continued for nearly 200 years. Notre Dame is one of the most famous landmarks in Paris and is considered a jewel of medieval Gothic architecture. Because of its popularity today, it's hard to believe that at the end of the 18th century, when the revolutionaries decided to convert it into a temple of reason, it was already in a sad state of disrepair and merely a shadow of its former glory. We can thank Victor Hugo and his Hunchback of Notre Dame for bringing attention to the sorry cathedral, which prompted interest to restore Notre Dame. In 2019, Notre Dame was famously ravaged by fire, which consumed its spire and roof. Completion of the restoration is planned for the end of 2024, and we here at Supersmart Traveler cannot wait. Notre Dame is definitely worth the visit, and we love climbing the towers to take in the bells, the gargoyles, and the views over Paris. Second, the Louvre was constructed in 1190, but not as we know it today. The Louvre began as a large fortress with thick defensive walls, which you can still see today in the basement. In the 14th century, it became a royal residence, and modifications continued over the centuries, with the Grand Gallery being built in the late 16th to early 17th centuries. Today, the Louvre houses perhaps the most famous collection of art in the world. If you plan on visiting, we would highly recommend reserving the tickets and a timed entry in advance. Additionally, the Louvre is enormous and spread out. Take a little time in advance to decide what you really want to see and make a plan. Third, Sainte-Chapelle was consecrated. Sainte-Chapelle is a magnificent little chapel with incredible stained glass windows that make up the majority of the upper walls, and what isn't glass is incredibly adorned and ornate. When you enter this chapel, if you are anything like us here at Supersmart Traveler, you will be taken back by its majesty. This chapel was built in incredible time for the Middle Ages, from 1241 to 1248, and was built to house the newly acquired relics of the Crown of Thorns and a piece of the Holy Cross, which since were moved to the treasury of Notre Dame. Sainte-Chapelle is only a short distance from Notre Dame on the Île de la Cité, and is worth a visit. You can also buy combo tickets for the nearby Conciergerie, which we will talk about later, if you would like to visit both and save a little money. After this time of prosperity under the Capetian kings came hard times. During the time of the 100 Years' War from roughly 1337 to 1453, Paris also had to deal with the Black Plague hitting Paris in 1348, and then famine and a string of cold winters in the early 1400s. Between the wars and disasters, Paris lost about half of its population, but Paris would rebound again during the Renaissance. In the 16th century, King Francis I decided that Paris needed a city hall worthy of its grandeur and status as the largest city in Europe, so he had this city hall replaced with the Hotel de Ville, which wasn't actually finished until 1628 under Louis XIII. His son, Louis XIV, grew up in Paris and later moved into the Louvre. Louis eventually wanted his own castle and had the Chateau of Versailles built into the palace it is today. Supersmart Traveler would highly recommend taking half a day during your visit to Paris and visiting the Chateau of Versailles and its gardens. Not only is the extravagance on display worth the trip, but the ease of getting to the suburb, with options including trains, the RER, and buses, makes it a top option for travelers. Louis XIV was also responsible for the construction of Les Invalides, which can be recognized for its gold dome. Les Invalides was built as a military hospital, but is now the tomb and resting place of Napoleon, as well as a military museum. During the reign of Louis XV, he commissioned a church to honor Saint Genevieve, who it is said saved Paris from destruction. This church is the Pantheon, that was patterned after the Pantheon in Rome. After the French Revolution, which we will talk about shortly, the Pantheon was instead transformed into a place to honor prominent French figures. Today you will find the resting places of Marie Curie, Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, and Voltaire, among others. Paris continued to grow in population, but not necessarily in cleanliness or opportunity. One could read or watch Les Mis by Victor Hugo to get an idea of the poverty of the masses, but also for what came to be the Enlightenment, which paved the way for the Revolution. On July 14, 1789, angry Parisians stormed the Bastille prison and the Revolution began. Nothing remains now of Bastille prison, as it was torn down stone by stone, but you can see where it once stood at the Place de la Bastille in the 4th arrondissement. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were imprisoned. Earlier in this video we mentioned the Conciergerie, that has a combo entry ticket with Sainte-Chapelle. The Conciergerie is where Marie Antoinette was imprisoned before her eventual execution, and Supersmart Traveler would recommend touring the Conciergerie to everyone interested in this period in history. In 1799, a certain Napoleon Bonaparte staged a coup and came to power. Napoleon certainly left his mark on Europe, including Paris, building many of the bridges and creating Père Lachaise Cemetery. Napoleon is also responsible for a lot of what is housed in the Louvre Museum. The Arc de Triomphe was built to honor his armies that fought for France. And we can thank Napoleon for another famous landmark, the church La Madeleine. Construction began on several churches before and after the Revolution, but these were torn down. Eventually, Napoleon commissioned the temple-like structure we see today to honor the French Navy. After the fall of Napoleon, La Madeleine was made into a church. After France and Paris went through a couple alternating kings and republics, Louis Napoleon became president, but then subsequently declared himself Emperor Napoleon III. Napoleon III really changed the face of Paris when he directed Baron Haussmann to modernize the city. Haussmann is responsible for wide boulevards, strict regulations for the height and style of new buildings, and many of the parks and squares around the city. The Opera Garnier was also built in this time period, from 1861 to 1875. It housed the Paris Opera until 1989, but is now mainly used for ballet. It is also well known for being the setting of the Phantom of the Opera book and later musical. From there, we see the Belle Époque emerge at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th. During this time period, we see the first football or soccer clubs pop up in Paris. Red Star FC was founded in 1897 as one of the first football clubs in France, and now plays in the suburb of Saint-Ouen in the third tier of French football. If you are interested in watching a football match while in Paris, Red Star could be a good choice for you if you're looking for a more homegrown feel. If instead you want to check out the current top Parisian football, then Paris Saint-Germain, known as PSG, is where to look. PSG was founded in the 1970s from the merger of two other Parisian football clubs. Also around the turn of the 19th to 20th century, Paris hosted a number of world fairs, including the 1889 World Fair that brought us the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower was the tallest structure in the world when it was built, and was only supposed to be a temporary structure. It is now arguably the symbol of Paris. Paris then hosted the 1900 World Fair that brought us the Pont Alexandre III Bridge, the Grand Palais, Petit Palais, and the Gare d'Orsay train station, which is now the Musee D'Orsay, that houses a large collection of art from some artistic superstars such as Monet, Manet, Degas, Renoir, Cézanne, and Van Gogh. Also during this time, Sacré-Cœur was built on top of Montmartre, and Paris introduced its first underground metro line. From the Belle Époque, we get into the more modern history, World War I, the Roaring Twenties, the Depression, World War II, but unfortunately we don't have time to go in depth into any of these major events, but would encourage you to learn more about these and other 20th century events. Now that we've taken a look at a very condensed history of Paris and some of its sights, let's give you a few Supersmart Traveler tips for your visit to Paris. Supersmart Traveler tip number 1, the best way to get around Paris is a combination of the metro system and walking. The metro system in Paris is both robust and frequent, and you are never very far from a metro station. As for which metro ticket is best, that will depend on your circumstances, where you want to go, and how quickly you're moving around. However, if you're only in Paris a few days and you want to make the most of the metro without worrying about tickets, Supersmart Traveler would recommend getting a Obelix pass each morning, which is a day pass for whichever metro zones you choose for that day. In combination with the metro, Paris is a very walkable city, and we feel like your Parisian visit may be lessened if you don't wander the streets of Paris a bit. It may be faster to drop into a metro station and pop up at the next site, but you will miss out if you don't walk the streets of Paris, get lost in the little neighborhoods, and perhaps stumble on a local bakery. Supersmart Traveler tip number 2, buy food at a supermarket for a picnic for at least one meal. Between the cafes and bakeries, the food in Paris is part of the reason we here at Supersmart Traveler love visiting. However, this includes getting a lunch from a supermarket for a picnic. Find a supermarket, choose a cheese or two, get a baguette, maybe a pre-made salad, perhaps a piece of fruit, a beverage of choice, and a chocolate bar, and have a picnic along the Seine, or at the Champ de Mars looking at the Eiffel Tower, or in a park, or on any bench enjoying the architecture of Paris. This will be a delicious meal at a very reasonable price with an amazing view. Supersmart Traveler tip number 3, if any of the main attractions like the Eiffel Tower, Louvre, Catacombs, or Versailles are on your must-do list while in Paris, book your reservations in advance. This will save you so much time waiting in lines. It has practically become a necessity now when visiting Paris. We hope you enjoyed this video. Just a reminder to like and subscribe and click the bell icon so that you too can be a super smart traveler.